In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can send Webflow form submissions to Airtable without having to use any third-party automation tools like Zapier or Integromat. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hey friends, welcome back. So in today's video, we are going to be setting up a very simple workflow where we are going to send Webflow form submissions to Airtable without using any third-party automation tools like Zapier or Integromat. So this workflow is going to be a fantastic starting point for anyone who has never set up any workflows in any automation tools, because if you are currently designing sites inside of Webflow, then obviously you can still access form submissions by just jumping into the form submission tab, but being able to send yourself an email or add it to a third-party database is actually just a really good way to stay on top of things. And setting up this workflow will literally take you 2 minutes, and it is something that will hopefully help you get your automation journey started. Now, you are going to need to be on the Airtable Plus plan, which I believe is $10 a month, but I can tell you right now, Airtable is a phenomenal tool, and even at $10, it's an absolute steal. So go and set that up in case you want to replicate this workflow. And then the only other thing that you need to do before we get into it is to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But with all those shenanigans out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so in order to get started, we're going to need to create a form inside of Webflow. So I've done that here. You can see it's pretty simple. And now one quick tip that I want to give you about forms, in case you didn't know, is if you need to make a field required, just simply click into the field, and then in the field settings, you can really simply just go down to this part here and just click on the required tab, and that will make this field required, so people can't just submit the form without also submitting their email. And so you can do that with whatever field you want. One other tip that I'd give you is to make sure that you give the name of the field an intuitive name. So I am going to rename my email field, and then also the option field, I'm going to rename this. And that way, when you pass these messages through inside of whatever workflow tool you're using, you'll know what field is what because you've named them properly. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set up the trigger event. So the trigger event is when someone fills out the form. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to first of all have to navigate our way to our project settings. Now in the project settings tab, we need to click on integrations and then scroll all the way to the bottom where we can find the Webhook section. Now with the Webhook section, all we need to do is click on add Webhook, and what you'll see is that it comes up with a little pop-up with an option to select a trigger type. So you've got two trigger types. One is the site publish and one is the form submission. We're going to be working with the form submission. Now the next thing that we're going to need to do is add a webhook URL. And the webhook URL is something that we're going to retrieve from the platform that we're going to use to send that data to. So in our case, it's Airtable. I created a table inside of Airtable where I'm going to be able to store all of my messages. And so the first thing that I'm going to have to do is to create a field for every single one of the fields that I have in my form. So I'm going to add a messages field. Then I am going to add an email field. So I'm just going to look in email. Then I'm also going to remove the attachment field because we obviously don't need that. So I'm going to then create the name field, which is a single line text, which is already taken. So we're going to go inquiry name for now. That will do the trick. I'll move this front, and then I'll also add a drop down for all of the options that we have. So I'm going to just call this here inquiry type. So as soon as we have all of this, now what we need to do is we need to get our webhook. And so you can get your webhook by clicking into automations and then adding a new automation and then defining your trigger event as when webhook is received. Now what's going to happen is Airtable will give you this webhook that you can now just simply copy, jump back into your Webflow project and paste. Now as soon as you have added that webhook, whenever someone submits a form, that will trigger the webhook inside of Airtable, and you can then send that data to whatever fields you want inside of your Airtable table. And so we're going to demo this. First of all, we're going to have to publish our page. And as soon as we've published our page, all we need to do is navigate our way to that page and then fill out the form and then trigger the webhook inside of Airtable. So I'm going to simply open the tab. It's going to take me to the support page. Now I'm just going to fill out my information. I'm gonna select that from the drop down. Now you may see that my email address is automatically populated. That is because I've included a feature with MemberStack where it populates certain fields with the email address that we're using. But if you're not logged in, this field will just be empty. And so what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna write this as a test, and I'm gonna simply click on send message and we're good to go. I'm gonna work on making the redirect or success message look nicer, but that is a task for a different time. So now that we have sent that, if we click on run test, we should get all of the information that was submitted, and we can see here that the test did run successfully. So what you'll be able to see now is all of the information that was submitted in the webhook. So you'll jump in here and you'll see your form name and your data, all that type of stuff. And all you need to do now is just simply open the data field, and you'll see that all of the information that was submitted is available to you now. So now you can just simply jump in here. You can click on create record. You can now select your table. And now from here, you can select what tables you want to populate. So we want to populate the inquiry name field, the messages field, the email field, and the inquiry type field. And so now what we can do is if we click on that blue button over on the side here, we can actually open up the body and start mapping fields to each other. So we're going to click on data. Now with the inquiry name, it's Connor. The messages, again, just go through that process again, clicking into the body and into the data of the webhook. Click on messages. Email, same story. We're going to go in here. Then we're going to go data. And then we are going to map up the email address. And then finally, we are going to add our inquiry type. And so if we click on data, you'll have that in here. And now one other field that I actually want to add is the status field. And one thing that I want to say about the status field is if you don't want to use a static value, you can just type in, if you don't want to use a dynamic value, you can just type in a static value, and that will then automatically change that status to whatever you've typed in here. And that can be super handy just for reviewing records. So if you're working with multiple people, you'll always know whether or not something has been dealt with or not. So now I'm going to run the test, see what happens, and we can now see that this record was created successfully. And so now when I jump back into Airtable, I can see that this all works. And so all that's left to do now is to, first of all, give this workflow a name. So we're going to call this support message Webflow. And then we are going to turn this on. One other thing that you can do that I always find pretty handy is to also add a Slack notification. So that is something that if you are using Slack makes sense because you'll just get notified as soon as you get a message. But other than that, all we need to do now is turn it on and then test it one last time. So I'm just going to hit the refresh button. I'm going to put in my name as test again, and then I'm going to select a different about, and then I'm going to go, this is a longer text field. How does this look in Airtable? And so then we're going to send the message. Now we're going to navigate our way back into Airtable, and you can see that the workflow pretty much automatically populated the record with all the information that was submitted in that step. Now, one little word of warning. If you are using multiple forms on your Webflow side, then this workflow will trigger whenever any of the forms are filled out. So for me, this workflow makes sense because currently I don't have any other forms that I am working with. But if you did have any additional forms, then you can use some custom code to apply some filters that filters out specific form names. And just like that, you've managed to set up a workflow with webhooks. And actually working with webhooks and your first workflow is actually quite a leap. So if you enjoyed that, if you feel good about the workflow that you've set up and you want to dive deep into it, then check out Code Meets No Code, which is a script library where we teach you how you can use tools like Airtable to set up certain workflows. It is designed for anyone who has no experience with workflows and automation, and it is heaps of fun. So other than that, I want to thank you for sticking around for the entire video, and I'll see you back here for the next one.